Here's a video about the sort of Turkish protests, mini-revolution that's happening right now. I'm actually out in the woods at the moment. I have nowhere else to make this video that's quiet, which is fucking pissing me off, but nonetheless, I'm doing it out here, surrounded by, Satan's green earth, as it were. I think people in the West have several misconceptions about these protests. I think first, the misconception, and I've gauged this primarily by looking at comments that are being left on CNN's, there's bugs all over me, CNN's comments area, which is a pretty good gauge of where most Americans lie, that a lot of people have the misconception that these protests are being held by radical Muslims against a secular government, because they've observed that same thing happen in Egypt and Libya. In reality, the government is the one that is more towards fascist Islam, with the government trying to ban abortions, supporting certain terrorist groups, which are Islamic in nature, which is a problem. The people that are protesting largely are the secular, the intellectual individuals, the youth, the intellectuals, certain disfavored labor class individuals. These are the people that are protesting. Also, I think they're getting this misconception from another standpoint. The Western media is focusing on protesters there that are shouting Allahu Akbar and all of this nonsense, which, if what I'm being told, and I'm talking to an individual actually from Turkey who would be more in the know, because a lot of times Turkey is more free than most Middle Eastern nations, but there is some censorship by their government of information coming into Turkey from elsewhere and also coming out of Turkey. And assuming this is true, it seems like the government is essentially planting its terrorist friends in these crowds to raise trouble and try to turn it into an Islamic revolution, try to get the zealots that are there whipped up into a frenzy, which may or may not work. And we've seen this happen before, of course, in Egypt. Originally, they weren't zealot Muslims that were uprising. They weren't zealous. And Turkey, of course, is far less religious as a culture than Egypt or Libya. There are far fewer Islamic extremists there. There are very few indeed. Most people have embraced secular law. The problem being with that secularity, and then we see this in the United States too, there comes a sort of laid-back attitude towards politics where the youth has no reason to vote, and the youth being the ones that are typically the intellectuals, the young urban professionals, as well as the college students. They have no reason to vote, or they feel they have no reason to vote, and so they're not represented in the government. So when these things happen, it sort of takes them aback, and even when they do organize, they get outflanked by a bunch of religious zealots. But the protests right now are largely secular. These people are actually fighting what seems to be a complete greaseball prime minister, and trying to unseat him, get him to step down, which he won't. We know that that's a fact. But I think the Western world ought to look at this, and it should support this movement away from corruption and tyranny towards, right now, apparently they were spraying tear gas at the protesters with basically no provocation. This happens in the United States too, less frequently than in the Eastern world, but it does happen that the police, for some reason, just kind of go crazy, either on someone's orders or because they feel threatened for some reason. Then apparently they started spraying some other sort of substance that was causing more advanced health problems in the people that were being contacted by it. I can't verify that. This individual I'm talking to claims this. It's probably true. Of course, they've got other substances they can spray on people. It's some sort of orange-colored substance. Now, Agent Orange? Who knows? We're not sure. But these are largely secular movements right now, and you've seen elsewhere in the Islamic world there have been secular movements. When Libya sort of got toppled, the moderate Muslims and secularists actually were attacking some of the extremists' headquarters and actually burning them to the ground, and kudos to them. They did better than the Egyptians, who largely sat back and let themselves get taken over now by Islamic extremism. It might take them another century to unseat it again. But the protests in Turkey, if we want to see this succeed, see, there's a problem. The Saudi Arabians control a lot of oil. And here's where it boils down to in the United States, and I've said it before. The Saudis have a lot of oil. We need a lot of oil. So the Saudis say, well, we'll keep the prices low as long as you kick out some Shiites and Alawites and secular dictators and put in some Sunni governments. And so we've basically been to, for some unknown reason, rather than simply kicking Saudi Arabia's ass and saying fuck you and taking the oil, which we should have done because they're an oppressive government, they should have been out a century ago. There's no reason for the Saudi government to have any power. There's no reason we should be doing business with them. We should have kicked them out. We should have helped their people revolt. I think they were primarily worried about doing that because of the possibility that it would lower oil production and raise the price a little bit. Well, the Saudis now, all they've got to do is threaten to raise the prices, and you've got some politicians who will bend over and suck their dick to do anything that they say. That's why we've been supporting essentially Al-Qaeda in Syria. We've been supporting the FSA, which we shouldn't do. They're allied with and or working with Al-Qaeda. We shouldn't have been supporting the rebels in Egypt, at least the Islamic rebels. We should have supported the secularists. We could have helped them out. Instead, we're seeing these countries fall into Islamic extremism. Now, of course, the Republicans aren't any help, because they'll say, well, in private they'll say, well, it's because Obama's a Muslim, rather than focusing on the real reason, which is their own gluttony for oil. But in Turkey, we don't see this so far happening. We see a popular secular revolution. We need to support it. The Turkish people are not rising up and demanding Sharia law. They're actually trying to prevent these things, which is something that I think most Americans would support if it weren't for the fact that, oh, well, we might upset those oil mongers over in Saudi Arabia. Well, you know what? We're the ones. The United States right now is becoming the top oil producer. We are moving toward, our own demand is shrinking. We're moving towards producing enough oil to feed our own habits plus sell it. We don't need the Saudi Arabians anymore. So why are we stacking up all of these countries that, let's face it, in 50 years, we're going to have to go back into these countries because they're going to start butchering secularists. They're going to start butchering gays. They're going to start butchering atheists. They're going to start butchering all of these people. We're going to have to go back into these countries and kick out the people that we helped install in the first place. Just like what we did in Afghanistan. Did you ever stop to think? We went into Afghanistan in the late 70s, early 80s. Gave all sorts of aid to the Mujahideen, to the people that were helping Osama, to fight the Soviets. Well, great idea. The Soviets lost. There's only one problem. 30 years later, then, we had to go back into Afghanistan to remove the person we armed in the first place. By then, him and his terrorist friends had all sorts of weapons and money and fortified positions because they had technology, and they had all the weapons, and they had all the money and power in the area, and they had the whole country just begging to suck their dick. And it took years to get him out, and we're still fighting the people that were spawned by our bad decisions there. We're setting up ourselves for failure in all of these other countries. In Syria, we're supporting the FSA. Let's say we do as McCain says and just arm the moderate rebels. Well, that's great. The problem being the more zealot rebels might kill the moderate rebels and take their guns and their money. It's very possible that they would do that. Or they'd feel betrayed, and then they'd go after us as soon as the fighting stops over there domestically. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. We need to support secularism in these countries. I know there's some people, for some reason, I don't understand the mindset of some of these politicians. Their mindset seems to be, well, it's bad to go into other countries and interfere with things and pretend that our culture's better. Well, I can respect that non-ethnocentric view. But then they go in anyway and they install a bunch of zealots. I never understood. Obama ran on the platform of let's scale down the wars, let's leave people alone, and now he's aiding these rebels and those rebels and giving flight superiority to these rebels, and we're just messing up again and again. Egypt is messed up right now. We messed it up. We lost. We fucked up Egypt. Egypt is crazed right now. We fucked up Libya. Thankfully, Tunisia didn't fall to a bunch of crazed rebels. Syria, what are we going to do there? It looks like we're going to fuck up there too. We don't need to fuck up Turkey too, which is, by the way, our key ally in the region. The Turks and the Israelis are the only countries over there that care that we even exist. We don't need to screw up relations with them. We don't need to install some Sharia state. Their government's already screwed up. We should help remove that government through any kind of support we can offer them. We should put a secular government in charge. It was supposed to be secular by constitutional mandate in the beginning. That's all the protesters want. They want the prime minister out. They want secular government. That's something I think we can support.